Good evening. Welcome to Economics 330, Global Trade and Political Economy, Medgar Evers College, City University of New York. Today is Tuesday, October 22nd, 2024. And this begins the formal section of today's office hour lecture. 2 classes ago, controlling of course for the 2-week intermission for our term paper, we began a 3-part study of the 3 theoretical perspectives of global trade. Again, just as a refresher, the 3 major perspectives include liberal perspective, realistic perspective, and historical materialism. And our discussion last week, of course, centered on the realistic perspective. And as we discussed in previous weeks, the common feature of the group of critical perspectives is that they are all critical of traditional, mainstream, liberal, and realist perspectives. While we will touch on several critical perspectives, we will devote more attention to historical materialism, or the Marxist theory, than to other critical perspectives, because it encompasses the largest group of critical theories, including Marxism, dependency theory, world systems theory, and Gramscian analysis. Although all these approaches have some roots in Marxism, they often diverge substantially from classical Marxist thought. Historical materialism is historical because it examines structural changes in terms of class and sometimes north-south struggles over time. And it is materialist because it examines the role of material, especially economics, in factors in shaping society. So just one quick clarification so we understand. When we speak in economics in terms of north-south divide, what we mean is the global north and the global south. If you were to look up the map of the world, you would realize that most, not all, but most wealthy nations are in the global north. That is the top half of the global map. And many developing, underdeveloped, or frontier markets, or countries that are considered to be in the periphery, are in the global south. That is the bottom half of the global map, if you were to look at it. So often as a shorthand, it is used as a heuristic to describe wealthy nations and countries that are in the common, to use a colloquial. And there are also countries in the global south are also sometimes called countries in the periphery. So the learning outcomes, as you must know from this week's learning activity that was posted, is that upon the completion of this module, you will be able to explain the following, and I'll quickly go through that so that we have a framework. Some students learn by reading, some others learn by reading and listening, and whichever works, I want to be sure that we have the basics covered. So the first thing is to explain how the Marxian school of thought perceives global trade. To which I would say that the Marxian school of thought on global trade relations perceives produced exchange value as inseparable from the creation of surplus profits through exploitation of surplus labor. In other words, the Marxist thought believes that the wealth in the global north is a result of exploitation in the economic exchange with the global south. It considers global trade relations as an inherently unequal relation, an inherently unequal exchange. The Marxian narrative fits into the phenomena of colonial trade. trade between developed and underdeveloped countries, as well as exchange of production between underdeveloped societies. More broadly, the Marxian narrative considers global trade relations as not the clash of interest and power, but rather a reflection of the global mode of production and the ensuring relation of production among nations. The second learning objective is to describe and explain global trade relations from perspective of neo-Gramscian theory, and for you to provide examples of dependency theory of global trade relations. To which I would say that the neo-Gramscian approach does not consider realist schools of thought. Remember last week, we covered the realist perspective, the realist school of thought and the liberal theories as mutually exclusive, but rather considers the very theoretical foundation of the two schools of thought as mutually reinforcing with interlocking relationship between agency and structure. In neo-Gramscian approach, a class or nation state cannot dominate in modern conditions by merely advancing its own narrow economic interest, and neither can it dominate purely through force and coercion. Rather, it must exert intellectual and moral leadership and make alliances and compromises with a variety of forces. Examples of dependency theory of global trade relations include, many have argued, especially in the global north, that China's BRI, which is the Belt and Road Initiative, and I hope that we've at least heard of the Chinese BRI initiative, has been accused by many institutions in the West as creating a debt trap and therefore dependency. Of course, some in this class have argued that IMF is a Western institution that creates dependency as well. Another example of dependency theory is the active extraction of resources from less industrialized poor periphery countries. That's what I told you. Periphery countries are typically the countries in the global south and countries that are not highly industrialized. So another example of dependency theory is the active extraction of resources from less industrialized poor periphery countries for the benefit of the highly industrialized, wealthy, poor countries. This is probably an example many can immediately relate to. So if you're from the Caribbean, you would know, for instance, that I think is Jamaica, either Jamaica or Trinidad has a lot of bauxite. But many of the aluminum and most certainly the products that are made from aluminum, which is based on bauxite, are not produced in Jamaica or Trinidad, in the Caribbean, whichever one of the two countries that bauxite is mostly mined from. So the argument here is that this creates a dependency where the Caribbean country kind of needs the industrialized North for market for its bauxite. This is not dissimilar. For instance, if you were to go to Venezuela or to Mexico, where there is crude oil, but most of the consumption, again, occurs in the global North. Certainly, many of the technologies that inform the petroleum refineries or the technologies that translate crude oil into petrol or gasoline, as we call it here, or engine oils and other refined products. Those intellectual property rights belong oftentimes to countries in the global North, controlling, of course, for China. And the argument here is that the dichotomy within this trading economic system creates a dependency. In this way, the world is polarized into two: the patron, highly industrialized, wealthy, poor nations, i.e. global North, and the dependent, less industrialized, poorer periphery nations. The theory would argue that periphery countries are poor because they are forcefully integrated into the international division of labor, where they principally function as suppliers of raw materials or repositories of cheap labor. So again, the argument here is that countries in the periphery are that the global manufacturing supply chain and the global economic system, if you believe in this theory at least, that it has been so rigged that countries in the periphery are going to be kept structurally poor because they either work in the extractive industry and in sectors that are considered value added, which is sectors that translate those raw materials into consumer products. That manufacturing often occurs in the global north. Worse, that countries in the periphery are typically used as repositories of cheap labor that manufacture lower value goods. So you will not see, for instance, it will be challenging to find a company that makes silicon or microchips in the global south, right? Again, controlling for Taiwan, which is really a highly industrialized country. This resource diversion is typically maintained through active collaborations of local elites of poor countries and dominant states who share common interests. So the argument here is one would then say, well, how come the poorer countries in the global south or the poorer countries that are considered to be in the periphery of global economic system, how come their leadership, the business leaders, are not actively and seriously advocating for a more equitable system? This line of thinking would argue that indeed this system is maintained through active collaboration of local elites in poor countries and dominant states who share a common interest, which is to make money. So if you are a powerful businessman in country A, and your business is really to go carve up rubber trees, extract the juice, and then sell it to countries in the global north, and they turn it into tires and all kinds of other products. You are the wealthy class. You probably are the class that would also provide the leadership, the prime ministers and the presidents. You really have no true incentive to rock that boat that has made you a very wealthy man with a lot of social capital. That's the argument here, that those who have become wealthy in the global south under this trading structure collaborate with the global north and are making a healthy income and therefore are less incentivized to try to change the global economic structure. So the next learning objective, of course, is to argue why global trade relations may be exploitative of developing countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. So it is really important to recognize that natural resources have no inherent value. And most middle-income countries in the global south or periphery countries, their economy is based on natural resources. And that raises two major challenges. There is often ebb and flow in the value of natural resources. And I'm thinking timber, crude oil, bauxite, gold, lithium. That boom and bust means that the countries go through cycles where the value of their currency is high because there is a high demand for whatever natural resource that they export. And then when the market gets saturated or the global north is in a recession and demand has softened, then they sell less and then they make less money. This creates a conundrum, and here is why. If there are countries generally have two major ways, there are generally two distinct ways to grow your economy. You could grow your economy through exports, or you could grow your economy through domestic consumption. So you create your own demand by consuming domestically. And some have a hybrid. Very few countries, the most industrialized economy, the United States being one of those economies that can actually generate economic growth by spurring domestic demand. The thing, though, is that if you're selling bauxite, just to stay on that example, and I don't know how I arrived at bauxite for today, but if you're selling bauxite and the price is really high and there's a lot of demand for your local currency, the local currency strengthens. So imagine if you also are trying to start an industry that makes sunglasses. If the value of your currency, because you're selling bauxite, becomes so strong, it means that your glasses will become too expensive. And that means that you're less likely to have your product in the glasses sector be competitive because they're likely to be overpriced because your currency is strong. And this can cause deindustrialization, where other industries separate from the natural resources begin to die, which is why a country like Norway is one of the largest hydrocarbon exporters, that is crude oil products. But to insulate its economy from the vagaries of the boom and bust of crude oil price, Norway does not directly fund its budget from crude oil price. What Norway does is that it puts the proceeds from crude oil into a sovereign wealth fund, which gives it a rate of return. And then it has a steady percentage that it flows back from that sovereign wealth fund into its budget support and capital projects in the country. So there is no boom and bust. It's a constant. There might be boom and bust in the amount of money that goes into the sovereign wealth fund, but that doesn't really affect the economy. What comes into the economy is a regulated percentage of earnings or returns that come from that sovereign wealth fund. So these are some of the challenges that countries in the global south have to think through how to better manage. And it's easier said than done. But sometimes we fall into the trap of saying, well, we have gold, we have oil, we have this, why are we not rich? Well, those things are really, they'll really make money based on how much demand there is in the global market. And you make even more money depending on the level of economic beneficiation that you get. So for instance, if you chop down, if you have a logging industry in a country and they chop down trees, put the trees in a ship and sell and then go sell it overseas, you're not really benefiting too much from that lumber. The folks in Italy and in China who buy that lumber turn it into ornate dining tables, living room coffee tables. In other words, the value chain of that product, of that lumber, are people making real money. So the other challenge that economies in the global south have to do is to improve the level of economic activity that occurs in the value chain of the goods and services that they sell. With that, we round up the formal section of this today's lecture. And next week, we will focus on international monetary relations. And that's where things begin to get interesting. And that's when we begin to have conversations about the International Monetary Fund. But the one thing that I want you to understand, from the last 3 classes, controlling again for the 2 weekend emission for term paper, is that there is a liberal perspective that that advocates for international order, rules-based international system, that calls for institution of World Trade Organization, the IMF, the World Bank Group, etc. There is a realistic perspective that says, well, that's not quite how it works, that countries are really just flexing to maximize opportunities for themselves. And the only rule, any any affection for rules beyond that that really serves the core interest of a country is misplaced. Then there is, of course, the critical perspective, as we've just gone through today, that argues that the system is rigged, that there's an inherent imbalance in the global economic structure, and the global economic structure was articulated, designed, and led by the global north, and of course is always going to advantage the global north, and that the reason the elites in developing countries or countries in the periphery or countries in the global south do not effectively advocate on behalf of their people is because they're in cahoots with the global international order, and because they're making a healthy profit under the current system or under the current economic regime. And that is why we are the way we are today. But it's a little bit more, it's more than that. And as we begin to continue our lecture next week with the International Monetary System, you'll begin to see that there are internal structures within an economy that are also just as responsible. With that, I would end today's formal lecture and take questions as they come along. Thank you.